Ah, that is a burning question, sir. I think she was dead.
Really?
Yeah, I think she was right here at the Houston Serve.
They were two of the sharpest minds ever to shape Columbo: Peter Falk, the brilliant detective himself, and Patrick McGoohan, the intense outsider who brought his own brand of genius to the show. Together, they created some of its most unforgettable episodes. But behind the polite interviews and award show smiles, there were whispers, power struggles, late-night shouting matches, creative sabotage, and a friendship that may have ended far darker than anyone realized. What really happened when two perfectionists collided behind the camera? Was McGoohan Falk's greatest collaborator, or the man who nearly tore Columbo apart from within? Stay tuned, because the truth about their relationship is far stranger and far more complicated than the show ever let on. Before the tension and rumors, there was genuine admiration. When Patrick McGoohan first stepped onto the Columbo set in the early 1970s, Peter Falk saw in him something rare. Another actor who treated television as serious art. Falk was already a household name, the face of the scruffy detective who outthought millionaires and murderers each week. McGoohan, known worldwide for The Prisoner and Danger Man, had a reputation for intellect and intensity. Their meeting seemed almost inevitable. Two perfectionists drawn together by a shared obsession with character and control. McGoohan's first Columbo appearance came in the episode By Dawn's Early Light in 1974. He played a rigid military commandant, and the performance earned him an Emmy Award. Falk was impressed, not just by the acting, but by McGoohan's command of every scene. He invited him back, and soon McGoohan was not only acting, but directing. The trust between them deepened quickly. Falk reportedly valued McGoohan's blunt honesty, even when others found it abrasive. He once described him as one of the few who could tell me when I was wrong. What made their partnership unique was how similar they were beneath the surface. Both men disliked Hollywood's bureaucracy. Both distrusted network interference, and both were known for challenging writers and producers if something felt off. Early in their collaboration, that defiance worked in their favor. McGoohan's direction added sophistication to Columbo's formula, and Falk's instincts kept it grounded. Together they shaped several standout episodes that blended psychological depth with quiet humor. Yet those same traits, pride, precision, and control, also carried the seeds of later conflict. As McGoohan's influence grew, so did the overlap between creative genius and creative friction. Colleagues noticed that the two men could move from laughter to silence in seconds during production meetings. What began as mutual respect sometimes looked more like a quiet duel of wills, but at this stage, the friendship still seemed unbreakable. Falk called McGoohan a brother in arms, and McGoohan often credited Falk for keeping Columbo alive long after other shows had faded. Neither man knew it yet, but the qualities that made them so compatible would soon test the limits of their partnership and the patience of everyone around them. Because while their first collaborations were built on respect, the episodes that followed would reveal just how differently these two visionaries saw the world of Columbo. As Columbo matured through the 1970s, it became clear that Patrick McGoohan was not content to simply play the guest villain. He wanted to shape the show itself. After the success of By Dawn's Early Light, McGoohan returned for Identity Crisis in 1975, this time as both star and director. It marked the start of his deeper creative imprint on the series, one that would both fascinate and frustrate those around him. McGoohan's directing style was unlike anything Columbo had seen. He favored longer takes, sudden silences, and psychological tension over traditional procedural pacing. Some crew members found his methods brilliant, others found them bewildering. He would rewrite dialogue on the spot, trim camera angles, or reframe entire scenes to emphasize moral ambiguity. Falk, who had final say as both star and producer, often backed him up. Their chemistry still worked. Two uncompromising artists protecting a show they believed in. But by the time Last Salute to the Commodore aired in 1976, the partnership had started to show cracks. The episode, directed by McGoohan, was tonally strange, almost experimental, filled with surreal humor and an ending ending that left even loyal fans puzzled. Some later called it the most divisive Columbo of all time. To some, it was McGoohan's bold attempt to push television forward. To others, it was proof that he was steering too far from what made Columbo special. Falk reportedly defended the creative risk, saying McGoohan had the courage to try something different. But privately, a few writers and producers felt that his growing control made the set tense and unpredictable. McGoohan's intensity was legendary. He disliked small talk, often preferred to work in near silence, and was known to walk off set if a scene felt compromised. Crew members described him as brilliant but relentless. Falk, in contrast, used humor to diffuse tension but could be equally demanding. When the two disagreed, whether about pacing, tone, or editing choices, their debates could stretch long into the night. Most of those arguments ended in mutual respect, but the undercurrent of rivalry was real. Each man wanted Columbo to be perfect, though their visions of perfection were starting to diverge. Despite these creative clashes, the results often spoke for themselves. Identity Crisis remains one of the show's most complex episodes, layered with espionage, identity, and psychological warfare. Hallmarks of McGoohan's own storytelling. It won critical praise and reaffirmed his reputation as a director who could elevate television drama. Falk continued to praise him publicly, but insiders noticed that the power dynamic had shifted. McGoohan was no longer a guest star, he was now an architect of the show's identity, and some wondered how long that balance could last. Because after the 70s ended and Columbo returned in the late 1980s, their collaboration would take on an even stranger shape, one that blurred the line between partnership and conflict, and left behind one of the most debated chapters in the show's entire history. By the time Columbo returned for its revival in the late 1980s, the series was no longer just a television classic, it was a legacy. Peter Falk, now the face of a beloved cultural icon, had more creative authority than ever before. And when Patrick McGoohan rejoined the production, their partnership seemed poised for a triumphant reunion. But the television industry had changed, and so had both men. What began as a collaboration built on mutual respect was quietly turning into a battle for control. The revival's production schedule was brutal. Each new Columbo movie-length episode demanded months of planning, often under tight budgets. Falk was known for his perfectionism. He could delay a scene for hours if the lighting or dialogue felt off. McGoohan, meanwhile, returned with even greater ambition. He wanted Columbo to explore darker psychology and more intricate storytelling. Their visions sometimes aligned, but when they did not, sparks flew. Crew members later described their creative process as inspired chaos. Falk might approve a script one week, only for McGoohan to overhaul entire sections the next. Producers had to referee disputes that ranged from pacing to character motivation. One writer recalled being told his finished script was being massaged, only to learn it had been completely rewritten overnight. Both Falk and McGoohan had earned the right to shape the show, but having two dominant voices at once meant every decision became a negotiation. Tensions also grew from outside pressures. Network executives wanted more accessible stories to appeal to a new audience. McGoohan resisted, arguing that Columbo should remain subtle and cerebral. Falk, ever protective of the detective's character, often agreed, but he also knew that the network held the purse strings. The two men began to clash, not just over creative choices, but over survival itself. How to keep Columbo relevant without diluting what made it unique. Their relationship became a paradox. Off-set, they shared mutual affection, dinners, and long phone calls about art, politics, and acting. But on set, each scene could turn into a test of patience. McGoohan's directing style demanded absolute focus, while Falk's improvisational instincts sometimes disrupted that control. Crew members would watch as McGoohan called for another take. Falk sighed in frustration, and both men retreated to opposite corners of the set, only to return minutes later with new ideas that somehow improved the final product. It was conflict, but it was also chemistry. Over time, though, the atmosphere wore people down. Writers grew hesitant to pitch ideas that might ignite another creative standoff. Editors dreaded post-production sessions where Falk and McGoohan could spend hours debating a single-line reading. Even those who admired their brilliance admitted it came at a cost. One crew member later said, "When they were in sync, it was magic. When they weren't, it was chaos, and you never knew which day you were getting." Still, both men seemed addicted to the challenge. They needed each other. Falk valued McGoohan's intellect, and McGoohan respected Falk's instinct, but beneath the surface, the friendship was straining. Their shared perfectionism, once a bond, was slowly becoming a fault line. And that fault line would crack wide open with one episode that turned admiration into accusation and collaboration into controversy. Because what happened during Murder with Too Many Notes would redefine their partnership and leave fans and insiders asking, decades later, what really went wrong. In the year 2001, Columbo returned once more, this time for what would become one of its most debated episodes, Murder with Too Many Notes. On paper, it had all the ingredients of a classic, a tangled mystery, an ambitious premise, and the reunion of Peter Falk and Patrick McGoohan. But behind the camera, the production became a storm of rewrites, conflicting visions, and bruised egos that many believe marked the end of the Falk-McGoohan partnership for good. The script began as an original story by writer Jeffrey Cava, a screenwriter known for sharp dialogue and complex plots. Cava envisioned an episode that paid homage to Columbo's early brilliance, a blend of psychological tension and cat-and-mouse drama. But once McGoohan signed on to direct, the script quickly took on a life of its own. According to Cava, and later reporting from the Columbophile blog, McGoohan rewrote large portions of the story. Sometimes without consulting him, characters were reimagined, motivations were altered, and the structure shifted so dramatically that by the time filming began, it was barely recognizable from Cava's original concept. Cava later expressed deep frustration over what happened, describing the experience as one of the most difficult of his career. He claimed that his vision was effectively taken apart and rebuilt in McGoohan's image. Those close to the production said that even Peter Falk, usually McGoohan's staunchest defender, was uneasy about the constant changes. Falk had always encouraged creative risk, but this time, the revisions seemed to lose the heart of the story. What was meant to be a clever, character-driven mystery became a confusing, uneven episode that critics struggled to interpret. When Murder with Too Many Notes finally aired, the reaction was lukewarm at best. Longtime fans of the series found it disjointed and oddly self-referential, filled with strange tonal shifts and moments that felt unfinished. The Columbophile review would later describe it as one of the saddest chapters in Columbo history, a project undone by ego and miscommunication rather than lack of talent. For many, it symbolized the point where the collaboration between Falk and McGoohan had simply stopped working. Rumors soon spread that the fallout went deeper than the episode itself. Some insiders claimed that Falk felt betrayed, not because McGoohan had rewritten the story, but because he had done it without transparency. Others argued that McGoohan believed Falk had lost the creative sharpness that once defined him, and that the show needed reinvention. Neither man spoke publicly about the tension, but those who knew them sensed the friendship had cooled. They still respected each other, but the trust that once fueled their creative magic seemed to have vanished. It is important to note that McGoohan's intentions were not malicious. He had always been a visionary, determined to make television feel like cinema, to challenge audiences rather than comfort them. But his drive to reshape Murder with Too Many Notes ended up fracturing the delicate balance that made Columbo special. Falk's grounded, character-first approach clashed with McGoohan's abstract style, and the result was an episode that reflected neither man's best work. After its release, both Falk and McGoohan stepped back from Columbo permanently. It was, in every sense, the end of an era. To fans, it was a disappointing finale to a remarkable partnership. To those who worked on the inside, it was a painful reminder of how even the most brilliant collaborations can crumble under the weight of ambition. Yet, for all the criticism, Murder with Too Many Notes remains fascinating. It captures, in a single production, the essence of Falk and McGoohan's relationship: creative brilliance entangled with control, friendship intertwined with frustration. It was the moment when two giants of television reached their breaking point, and as the credits rolled, one question lingered in every viewer's mind. Was this truly the end of Columbo, or simply the cost of two uncompromising artists refusing to bend? When Murder with Too Many Notes aired, many viewers expected a nostalgic celebration, the reunion of Peter Falk and Patrick McGoohan, two icons of intelligent television. Instead, what they saw left them divided. The mystery was muddled, the pacing uneven, and the tone unlike any Columbo before it. Online discussions and fan letters that followed painted a mixed picture: respect for the actor's talent, but disappointment at what many described as a confusing swan song. Few could have guessed guessed that this imperfect episode would quietly mark the end of one of television's most fascinating creative partnerships. Critics were blunt. Some called the episode self-indulgent, suggesting that McGoohan's directorial vision had overtaken the heart of the story. Others argued that Falk had allowed too much creative freedom at a stage when tighter control was needed. The Columbo blog, which later revisited the episode in detail, labeled it a cautionary tale about unchecked influence, suggesting that both men's reputations suffered from their unwillingness to compromise. It was an uncomfortable truth. Two of television's sharpest minds had produced an episode that felt strangely disconnected from everything that had once made Columbo great. Behind the scenes, the fallout was quieter but more personal. Falk and McGoohan remained cordial, but those who spoke with them later recalled that their friendship had cooled. They no longer spoke on the phone regularly, and there were no plans for another collaboration. When McGoohan later reflected on his time with Columbo, he offered only brief, guarded comments. Falk, too, avoided direct discussion, preferring to celebrate McGoohan's earlier contributions rather than the tension of their final years. Both men were proud, and neither seemed interested in revisiting old wounds. For fans, the episode became a symbol of something larger, the struggle between art and ego, between creative freedom and discipline. Online forums decades later still debate who was right. Some insist that McGoohan was simply ahead of his time, experimenting with form and tone in ways that confused audiences used to traditional structure. Others argue that Falk's loyalty blinded him to the damage that unchecked collaboration could cause. What remains consistent is the fascination. Few creative duos in television history have inspired such lasting discussion. Over time, perspective softened. As years passed and nostalgia grew, viewers began to reassess McGoohan's Columbo episodes as a whole. While Murder with Too Many Notes and Last Salute to the Commodore remained controversial, earlier works like By Dawn's Early Light and Identity Crisis were hailed as masterpieces. Critics acknowledged that McGoohan's influence helped push the series beyond the conventions of the detective genre. His direction gave Columbo its rare moments of cinematic depth, moments when viewers forgot they were watching television at all. Peter Falk's reputation, meanwhile, remained untouchable. To audiences, he was still the heart of Columbo, warm, clever, and endlessly human. If anything, his willingness to collaborate with strong personalities like McGoohan reinforced the image of an actor devoted to his craft. Even when episodes faltered, Falk's performance anchored them. Yet for those who studied the show closely, the cracks between him and McGoohan told a deeper story, one about the fine line between creative partnership and creative competition. By the time McGoohan passed away in 2009, Falk spoke of him only with admiration. He called him a giant of television and credited him with shaping some of the show's finest moments. Still, fans sensed an unspoken truth, that their final years together were complicated, filled with both gratitude and regret. The tension between them had never been about animosity. It was about passion. Both men wanted Columbo to be perfect, but their definitions of perfection had simply grown too far apart. And while the dust eventually settled, the question that haunted fans remained. Did that final conflict mark the natural end of an era? Or had Columbo been caught in the crossfire of two geniuses who could no longer share the same vision? Because as the years passed, the legend of their creative bond only grew stronger, and the truth of what really happened between them became as layered and mysterious as one of Columbo's own cases. In the end, the story of Peter Falk and Patrick McGoohan is not one of betrayal or rivalry. It is a portrait of two perfectionists who cared too deeply about their craft to ever settle for less. Their relationship began with admiration, grew into collaboration, and eventually strained under the weight of their shared ambition. It was not malice that divided them, but passion. Both men were consumed by the desire to protect Columbo from mediocrity, even if it meant clashing with each other to do it. The irony is that their conflict produced some of the most unforgettable moments in television. McGoohan's direction gave Columbo its edge, its eerie silences, and its moral depth. Falk's humanity kept it grounded, warm, and universal. Together, they shaped a detective who outlasted generations, a character whose wrinkled raincoat became a symbol of television at its most thoughtful. Without McGoohan's daring, the show might have stayed safe. Without Falk's restraint, it might have lost its soul. What really happened between them was, in a sense, the same mystery their show explored every week. A story about pride, vulnerability, and the cost of genius. The The truth is that their friendship never truly ended. It simply evolved into quiet respect, carried beneath years of creative tension. When Falk spoke of McGoohan after his death, his words were simple but telling. He gave Columbo a mind sharper than mine. For a man who rarely praised others publicly, that single sentence said it all. Their final collaboration, Murder with Too Many Notes, may not have been perfect, but perhaps that imperfection is what makes it so fitting. It reflects the messy human reality of great art, that behind every masterpiece lies conflict, compromise, and sometimes heartbreak. Falk and McGoohan's partnership reminds us that creativity is not always harmony. Sometimes it is friction that lights the spark. So the next time you watch Columbo and see that quiet detective tilt his head, smile, and say, "Just one more thing," remember that behind that line stood two men who challenged each other to make television just a little bit smarter, and in doing so, made it timeless. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of television's most fascinating partnerships, do not forget to like this video, share it with fellow Columbo fans, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden drama behind Hollywood's greatest moments. And tell us in the comments, whose vision do you think defined Columbo more, Peter Falk's heart or Patrick McGoohan's mind?